Hello, my name is Rachel Beal, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on structuration theory by Anthony Giddens. Overview. So structuration theory explains the act of human agency, so action, in the context of social structure. Human agency and social structures are not two separate concepts, but together produce social action and interaction. They build off of and are reinforced by each other. So it's a duality of structure. Giddens explains that we are all actors who play roles in different communicative situations through which we reinforce social moral traditions that develop through modernity and are affected by globalization and technology. So in the corner I have this figure, and it's one arrow leading into the other. So think of one arrow as human action and think of the other arrow as social structures. So as humans, through communicative action, we create social and moral norms, and these social and moral norms then dictate human action, so human communicative action. So they feed into each other and they are created by each other. So aspects of modern culture that shape structuration. We have distanciation. This is the local and global praxis has widened. There are more influences that are not just localized but distant influences that now shape our societies and social structures. We have been exposed to others' cultures which have influenced us. Power and agency. More modern societies recognize the power divide and allow for more freedom in personal decision making. Risk. Modernity introduces the ability to calculate natural disasters and when to expect them, and inadvertently helping cause them through greenhouse gases. Modernity has also caused for new forms of risk to emerge, such as terrorism. Trust. Individually, we are not all experts about all known subjects, so we must vest our trust in others such as experts, scientists, politicians, and each other. This is especially prevalent in times like this, such as COVID-19, where we need to trust the scientists, we need to trust the professionals about the statistics of COVID. Next slide is historical development. So this theory was developed around the period of late modernity, but was comprised in 1984 in Giddens' book, The Constitution of Society, Outline of the Theory of Structuration. Giddens looks at modernity as continuous change through expansion of capitalism, development of industry, including technology, which allow for a more interdependent world, which lends itself for more personal freedom. Including that through time and modernization, this theory will become more prevalent in our society. The link between communication and leadership. So Giddens explains the vitality of communication in this theory, which is reinforcing social structure. He explains that we are all actors who are playing a role in our social societies. There are 4 structured practices we carry out through communication with one another that reinforce these social structures. So the first is procedural rules, which is how communication is performed. We are all actors playing our different roles in these social situations. Next is moral rules, appropriate ways to carry out social interactions, and then material resources, and this is means of production and compensation. This is like commodities, income, consumer goods, capital, and how there is an inequality of compensation that is attributed throughout our society. Resources of authority. So this is formal organization of systems, and this is like democracy, capitalism. And he explains basically that we are all leaders because we carry out communicative practices to reinforce social norms when conversing with one another. So as long as we are participating, we are leaders. How a sociologist theorist thinks. Anthony Giddens is an accomplished British theorist who focuses studies and works on sociology, so he's a sociologist. In general, theorists analyze patterns in human communicative behavior and make educated inferences on why they occur to bring a greater understanding to human communicative practices. Giddens, as a sociologist, describes his outlook on human behavior through a lens of 3 divided focuses, which are time, space, and power. You can see in his theory, he heavily takes into consideration these 3 aspects and their effects on human social structure. He goes into further depth, explaining that time and space affects social structure, and then dictates the power divide, which inevitably leads to violence in societies. The next is how evidence and data are used when applying the structuration theory. So practical application of this theory is often used in organizational context. So Behrens, Boersman, and Wegeman used the structuration theory to gain deeper insights and learn more about the relationship between individuals and organizations in their journal article, The Structuration of Organizational Learning. Through the lens of this theory, they were able to connect the relationship of individuals and organization as two entities that work together that can help form each other. The findings suggested that organizational learning cannot be dwindled down to the individual, but how organization and individuals shape their practice. To elaborate, organizational learning should focus on how the structure and its practices gets changed and how the organization itself gets changed when these practices are implemented. To gain a better understanding of organizational learning and implementation. Proving that if managers want to further organizational learning, it's not up to the individual, but the social practices throughout the organization which lead learning and change. So due to this, what are the limitations of this theory? So due to this theory being so intertwined with modernity and modernity heavily being controlled and changed through industrial production, as Giddens explains earlier, through modernity, i.e. technology, we have become more interconnected, which has made us as social groups evolve with time through our communication and sharing of knowledge and new norms. Like, I'm going to mispronounce this, but like I'm just going to skip. The two authors point out that in their article, Digital Inequality, which we read earlier in this class, there are groups of people still to this day that have little access to technology and little access to knowledge or other parts of the world, leaving for these groups to reinforce traditions and evolve at a much slower rate, leaving little room for human agency and social structure to evolve and little room for individual freedom of action. John B. Thomas, who is another famous sociologist, has a big famous critique on this theory, and he says that it's too broad and the rules of the structure were not specific enough to successfully implement and prove, lacking consistency with the general social structure theory. And I have to agree, this theory was really hard for me to get a good grip on because it was very broad, so not very specific, and then on top of that it had so many rules and so many layers to it. So at first glance, it looks pretty simple, but there's a lot of other attributes to it that made it a little bit difficult to really fully understand. So my next slide is application of structuration theory to public relations. So I want to go into public relations. This is something that is interesting to me, so I related this theory to public relations. So viewing this theory as a social practice in the public relations realm of communication, Falcomer talked about this connection in his article on Giddens interpreting public relations through Anthony Giddens' structuration and late modernity theory, by emphasizing campaigns centered around benefiting and transforming the community and environment. Falkenheimer explains that implementing the structuration theory into public relations could make for a less agency-driven public messaging. By refocusing communicative imbalances to the power structure in public relations and emphasizing the relationship to more community-based. This would produce a more conscious PR view of community. Public relations in social systems is a social system in itself that reinforces societal and social norms through messaging to the mass public. Through the lens of structuration, PR would be more community-based and become more integrated into an organization. Which I like. I really like this point, this viewpoint of making PR less biased, I guess, form of communication, and a little bit more community-based, and the community has more of a say. So last but not least, here are my references. I think there's like 8 in total. And that is it. Thank you for listening to my presentation.